Hello, this is Joseph Dano with Predictive Solutions, and welcome to my video entitled Not All Contracts Require Signatures, Psychological Contracts and Workplace Deviance. Traditionally speaking, the employee-employer relationship revolved around the unwritten understanding of job security in exchange for hard work. This original psychological contract is now a thing of the past. But psychological contracts between employers and employees will always exist. The employee-employer relationship is governed by the often unspoken rules of social exchange, and when employees perceive that the organization broke a promise, employees respond by hurting the interests of the organization. In this video, I will provide tips to help organizational decision makers recognize employee perceptions and behaviors associated with psychological contract breaches, and more importantly, tips to help these issues get resolved. When employees perceive breaches of justice and fairness in the organization, they sometimes internalize it as opposed to asking for a meeting to discuss the issues. These breaches include mismatches between what was promised or expected versus what is actually being received, such as pay issues, scheduling conflicts, or task expectations. Over time, many employees experience dissonance about their jobs. The true nature of a company's expectations may not be what they expected, and as energy is spent on their inputs, such as training efforts and performance, tension often builds about the outcomes they receive, such as pay, social interactions with managers, or the commitments they want from the company. When someone's inputs no longer match the expected outcomes of rewards, dissonance sets in. The honeymoon phase for an employee can end very quickly when the ratio of returns from the company are the same or less than the investments of one's perceived efforts. Researchers have discovered several observable behaviors that are predictors of your employees experiencing psychological contract breaches. In general, the flow of the employee-organizational relationship looks like this. The employee organizational commitment, or EOR, is mediated by the social exchange and the perceived mutual investments between the two parties. This then leads to either job embeddedness, engagement, and organizational commitment, or it will lead to quitting intentions, disengagement, and turnover. If the employee feels that the commitment from the organization is too low in relation to their own, or if trust does not exist, or if the relationship between the parties is not seen as a sustainable one, then the psychological contract is broken. Essentially, people begin to perceive that there is not a fair and equitable social exchange. On this slide, the plus arrows indicate an expected positive relationship, and the negative arrows representing a negative relationship between these two variables. Here are the behavioral indicators that workers feel betrayed by their supervisors, managers, or by the organization in general. Number 1, workplace deviance. If you have an employee who is pushing or testing organizational norms, there's usually a reason for this. Number 2, people in the organization have mentioned a lack of support from leadership. This may be things that you hear around the water cooler. Number 3, lack of effort. Often employees begin to slack off because they feel betrayed. Number 4, tardiness and absenteeism. And number 5, disengagement from non-mandatory workplace events like Christmas parties or volunteering opportunities. While it is not always a sign of psychological contract breaches to observe one or two of these behaviors, it is a sign of a perceived psychological contract breach if you observe most or all of these behaviors. In this case, it is an indicator that needs to be addressed. So where do you start? Many decision makers find it easy to blame the employee for what's going on, but the reality is that it's not always that you hired a bad apple. Instantly placing the blame on the employee is usually too simplistic for most human resource issues, including this situation. These problems often do not get resolved because it's easy for leaders to use mental heuristics or mental shortcuts to blame others. The most well-known mental heuristic is known as the fundamental attribution error. They blame everyone but themselves for what's going on, and it's easy to blame the employee for issues going on in the company. Here are some tips for employers to consider so they can start diagnosing and fixing potential psychological contract breaches inside your organization. There are two types of psychological contract orientations, or the way that employees view the psychological contract. Do your employees consider their positions to be career potential roles, or do they view the position as a short-term means to an end, such as paying the bills for now? According to Morrison and Robertson in 1997, transactional contracts are viewed as specific, short-term, and monetizable obligations entailing limited involvement of the parties. It is a transactional relationship that focuses on nothing more than the completion of tasks in return for pay. Usually these positions are not career opportunities. Examples of this would be a restaurant server position or retail position in which there is little to no commitments from the employer or the employee, such as low pay, part-time positions, etc. Compare this to a relational psychological contract. In this relationship, both parties have an expectation of loyalty, support, and long-term commitments. Employees who perceive their roles as relational contracts are shown to have higher organizational citizenship behavior levels and employee engagement levels. They are seeking more than just exchange of money and time. They truly view the position as a career opportunity. Organizational citizenship behaviors involve the social and psychological environment that facilitates task performance. As you can see in this illustration, turnover intentions are positively related to transactional psychological contract orientations and negatively related to relational contract perceptions. Additionally, transactional worker perceptions are positively related to deviant behavior and negatively related to organizational citizenship behaviors. The opposite was found for workers who perceived their workplace psychological contracts as being relational in nature. Way too often, companies make promises to candidates in entry-level positions that simply do not exist. When the offer was made to an employee, was there a clear and realistic expectation about career opportunities or lack thereof? Were they given false promises about career potential? Has anything changed in the organization that may have violated these original expectations of your employees? Employee turnover is not always controllable for companies, but when it is most often caused by violations of psychological contracts. Research on this topic also shows that unless such issues are resolved within companies, they tend to escalate into more harmful and more destructive behaviors. The bottom line is that employees want to be treated as humans, not as an economic resource. Although employees can and do experience both types of psychological contract relationships, intrinsic motivation to the organization comes from those who desire social exchanges and obligations. According to Vroom's expectancy theory in 1964, an employee's efforts and intentions are based upon three factors. Number one, the attractiveness of the outcome they receive, such as pay, belongingness, achievement of personal goals. Number two, the probability that their efforts will produce the desired rewards, based upon the expectations of how the position will or will not benefit them in their pursuits. And number three, the probability that their efforts are producing the performance they desire. So in other words, are they obtaining the rewards that they were working for at the end of the day? If you observe trends of psychological contract violations, you may require a consultant to resolve the issues. The cost of hiring new employees is almost always higher than keeping the ones you have now. We offer preventative trainings and diagnostic tools designed to measure and resolve organizational psychological contract breach issues. A large body of research supports that reactions to contract breaches can be mediated by personality characteristics, which of course can be measured during the selection process. There is a link between personality characteristics to the way that workers perceive psychological contract breaches. For example, people who score low in conscientiousness and agreeableness and high in neuroticism are people that are more likely to experience psychological contract breaches. I also offer validated questionnaires that can be administered anonymously to your team. If you found this content helpful, please subscribe to get notified for my upcoming videos. If your company is experiencing hiring, performance, engagement, or retention issues, please reach out to me to learn how you can implement scientifically grounded solutions that help resolve human capital issues. Thanks for watching.